One morning we woke up, all our water was frozen, all our food was frozen. So we had nothing to drink, nothing to eat. Our shoes were frozen.
Even the toothpaste was frozen. But then the beauty is that we just set off, okay, we cannot eat anything, we cannot brush our teeth. And then the first shop that we arrived to, they immediately invited us for some good Armenian spirit, 10 in the morning, some hard alcohol, warms you from the inside.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to introduce my guests for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Hanna and Jonas. These two ecologists with an adventurous mindset came up with the idea to cycle 20,000 kilometres through 20 countries. Their trip is called Biking for Biodiversity, and along the way they actually sought out biodiversity initiatives taking place in the countries they were travelling through. Setting off from Germany in April 2022, they have almost reached the end of their bicycle tour, and I'm actually recording with them right now while they are in Malaysia, country number 19. I'm excited to speak with both of them today and to learn more about the adventures of embarking on such a long bicycle tour, one which spans 2 continents. But I'm also really keen to hear about what they have discovered when it comes to the human-nature relationship and how locals are dealing with biodiversity issues in their own communities. Hanna and Jonas, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having us. What an introduction.
Thank you, Hanna. How are you doing as well, Jonas?
We're doing very well here. We just arrived, settled down, and now we're ready to talk about what we've experienced the last few months in Southeast Asia.
I'm excited to go on this learning journey with both of you, but a question which I start my show off with, and I ask this of all my guests, is, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode? So I'll open it up to the floor. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, for me, I don't remember the first bike I rode. I do have some memories of learning how to ride a bike in the little street in front of my house. But I do remember the first bike that I kind of bought consciously. And that was actually the bike I had until before we started this trip. So I bought it when I was like 17. I had it for 12 years, I think. But then before the trip, I had to realize that it's probably not going to make it all the way to Singapore. So then it was time to get a new one.
I love that you've got a long-standing relationship, like a bike that's lasted 12 years in your life. Do you actually still have it, or did you sell it to buy your touring bike now?
I tried to sell it, but nobody wanted to have it. It was really not in a good condition anymore. And since we moved, left our jobs, left our home, everything, I also couldn't take the bike, so it just stayed behind.
If it's anything that I've learned about bikes is that as long as the frame's okay, we can always replenish the parts and keep it going too. So that's cool. What about you, Hanna? Can you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Yeah, for me also, when I thought back to this question, and also I think what came to my mind is buying my first bike actually. When I went to university and I had no money whatsoever, so I bought the brand is Chapel. It's a Hungarian brand from the Soviet era. It was a very good bike brand. And the bike itself was also like 40 years old, a city bike, single speed. It had like a fixed gear brake. So I had to pedal back to brake, which was really hard to get used to because it was the first bike that I had that worked in this way. So I was every time when I was riding in the city, I accidentally just broke because I forgot that I cannot just pedal back. I felt very free owning this bike and making this conscious decision to purchase it. So that was really cool. And we had a very good relationship.
I'm guessing you don't have that bike anymore either, or if you've sold everything or left everything behind for this big trip?
Yeah, I gave it to one of my friends when I moved away after university. So I don't know what's up with it, but we shared a lot of good memories. I don't know who owns it right now.
It's a bit like that with bikes, isn't it? I don't know whether either of you have done this during your trip, I do every now and then. I'll be riding and then I'll just look down at, something on my bike, like a top tube, or maybe there's a scratch and I remember where that mark was from, but it invokes memories. It's like you build a relationship with this object because it's taking you to somewhere to experience things. Do either of you relate with that?
Yeah, totally. And when people ask us like, oh, like, will you leave your bicycle in Singapore when you finish this journey? Like, we're like, no, of course not. Why would we? Like, it served you so well already 2 years. And we're like, well, it might serve us our whole lifetime if we care for it well enough. And really, it's grown on us, our bicycles, and we really would not want to leave them behind anywhere.
No, absolutely not. A great segue into asking you both, what sort of bikes have you taken on this trip? What touring bikes did you get to set you up for a 20,000 kilometer journey?
Yeah, that was actually a long journey to figure that out. Because as I said, I had a bike that was almost run down. Hanna had a very cheap mountain bike that she used before. So it was clear we can't start with them, which we would have loved to just continue. And then we started researching, and there are so many different opinions on what is the right bike to do such a journey. Some people go with the 6,000 euro roll off everything belt drive bike. Some people say as simple as possible so it can be repaired everywhere. So in the end, we did go for a steel frame because that's supposedly the most durable, but everything else is pretty standard. So it's a Fuji touring bike. It's definitely, when it comes to touring bikes, in the lower grades, but we're very happy with them. Of course, things wear down, things break with every bike, but so far we're very happy.
And also, like, the decision basically was influenced by the market as well, because we didn't really prepare for so long before the journey started, and it was already December when we started searching for bicycles, and 2021 it was still kind of COVID and everybody was buying bicycles. So then we looked into it and we realized that many are not in our sizes or somewhere in another country and we cannot order them. So it was, even we felt lucky that we found 2 bicycles in our price range, in our sizes, close by to us, that we could actually buy in the end.
Yeah, in the end we had to order from the UK to Germany, and the other one we contacted every single official retailer of Fuji bikes in Germany and ask whether they have this model, and one replied that they have it in the right size.
It was meant to be.
Yeah.
I mentioned Hanna and Jonas. You're both ecologists. You both, obviously, that's your professional background. I would say your profession meets with a passion as well for the environment. I think I'd be correct to say that. I was wondering, how did the idea to take such a type of trip come about, like with both of you, and who came up with it? And what sparked that?
Yeah, we both met working for an environmental NGO in Austria a few years ago. And that's where we worked until we started this trip. And then our time there came to an end. We realized that we don't want to work there anymore. And there we worked a lot behind the scenes of nature conservation projects. We worked a lot from the computer and stuff. And then when we knew, okay, this cut is going to come anyway, we thought, okay, this is the time to go out and see these projects that we've worked on, which we've visited some of them on this journey, how it actually looks on the ground, and also see in other countries, how does it look on the ground? How do people work? How do they protect local biodiversity?
Yeah, we were mostly working on a European scale. So we had certain projects in mind that we find very, very interesting. And from our university years, we were always very much into field work and being out in the field. So we just found that this idea would be really amazing for us to learn. And then from that on, just like it was the next step, logical step to say, okay, if we spend this time, then we might as well write about it and share these stories to other people. So this is how we basically came up with this idea. And it also kind of developed over time, and we realized that maybe the value that we find in it is that there's so many negative stories out there about the state of nature that most people just are faced with this, like, basically overwhelming negativity. Okay, species are going extinct, habitats are getting lost, climate crisis, and always crisis. And this kind of feeling just paralyzes them, and you feel passive. You feel like you as an individual cannot do anything. We wanted to share positive examples of many people all around the world in every country who do great work to protect biodiversity. They have great successes, and their stories can inspire other people to also get active in their own little area where they live. That was kind of one of the main ideas.
I have to say, Hannah, hearing you say that resonates with me so much because it's 100% true. Often we are bombarded with that word crisis. It's very easy to feel defeated about the state of the environment. I guess what you're saying there, Hannah, if I'm hearing right, is there are great things happening out there. It's not all pessimistic. There are people already building solutions for things that are going on too.
Yeah, exactly this. And they are just some of the people who basically get active, but they are not unique in the sense that what they do, anybody could repeat, regardless of whether they have studied nature conservation, whether they have any kind of professional background in it. There are many ways how we can all get active to protect nature. And this is ultimately what will save our future. So it's quite important.
Channeling back, taking long distance trips, had either of you had you any experience with things like that?
For me, really just one experience. I once cycled from Frankfurt to Amsterdam, which is like 700 kilometers with a friend. So that was like a week-long, 10-day-long trip. But that was the only one.
Yeah, also for me, when I was in my teens, we did these 1 week long cycle tours, but there all our luggage was carried by a van and it was very well planned.
I bet you wished for that a few times on this trip.
Yeah, it would have been pretty good, but it was like very well planned. This campsite, because we were all children basically. So not like this. We were active in other ways. We were living in Austria. We were living in the Alps in a very small town actually, and we were into hiking, a lot of winter sports, ski touring, and then also occasionally mountain biking, but not dirt road, single track, just on the asphalt up the mountain and down. So we were active people, but never did such a long bike touring journey.
What that tells me is like when you set off on an expedition that's 20,000 kilometers long, and it blows my mind the distances you can travel on that one big landmass. But you obviously then have to strap on a lot of gear to the bikes that's going to sustain you on that. And I know there's ways of being more efficient with what you take and what you choose to bring, what you don't bring. What was it like then deciding all of that and preparing all that, you know, with this concept that you hadn't undertaken big, massive trips like this and you were novices to this element?
Well, the advantage of doing other trips before, which in the end were much more remote, you know, now it's been 20,000 kilometers, but barely did we ever like do half a day without passing a settlement or so. On the other hand, if we went 3 days hiking before, we didn't see anything during those 3 days, you know? People think 20,000 kilometers, 2 years, is like so massive. But the reality is you basically have to plan for a week and everything else you can do after that week, you know? It doesn't really matter how long the trip is, especially nowadays. Like you can get everything anywhere, basically. You're always just a few weeks away from a spot where you can get whatever you need. So it's really like people think, oh, 20,000 kilometers, 2 years, how do you plan? But you plan the same way you would plan for months. It doesn't really change. And we also started with the mindset, like, you know, the 20,000 kilometers came because we looked kind of at a map. And so how far could we go? And then we came Singapore because there's only water. How far is that roughly? How many countries would we cross to get there? But it was clear that we don't know how long it's going to take, you know, because it was also still COVID. So we don't know that. We thought maybe we'll get into another lockdown. We might have to quit the journey because of that, you know. So we packed with things that you need for spring and autumn and summer in Europe, and everything else we could just do afterwards.
That's true, though. When you say it like that, it is very true. There's not many different things that you need to take with you, whether you're going for, say, 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 years, is there?
And also, if we kind of thought in the beginning that if we miss something on the way, we can always buy it. At least within Europe, we can always order it. We didn't want to, already pre-stop with I don't know, like a solar charger or whatever other camping chair, whatever people carry. We were thinking, okay, we will just start the journey with actually the equipment we already had. Like we bought new bicycles, we bought used pannier bags and everything else we basically had from outdoor trips before. And we thought, okay, like if we need something, we will just get it on the way, but we didn't want to buy anything that will in the end be useless.
I guess then it's obvious, like the outdoors is part of your life. I actually think being based in Austria before this trip, it would have been great for your fitness before setting out. Hello listeners, it's Bella here, host and producer of Seek Travel Ride. Many of you have recently gotten in touch with me to find out how you might be able to support the show. I am an independent podcaster, which pretty much means I sort of do everything. I research my guests, I interview them, I put their audio together and I do an edit of that, and then obviously I release the episodes and market them as well. It's been a great experience now for just over a year, and we have 60 episodes in the bag as well. But pretty much if you do want to support the show and show some love to the content that I have been producing, I have recently set up a Buy Me a Coffee account. It's just a way that you can financially contribute to the show and put some funds towards the running costs of producing this podcast. I'm very proud to be an independent podcaster, and whilst it does mean there's a lot of work on this show at my end, it's an absolute joy to bring it to you at your end. I have included a link in the show notes to my Buy Me a Coffee account there, so if you want to support the show, just click on that link. Once again, thank you all so much for your support. Now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, the disadvantage is that in the Austrian mountains, it's really not so comfortable to cycle between like November and March because it's very cold and snowy. We focus more on mountain sports, on skiing and stuff. So we had like a general fitness, but that's also something, people think like, how do you prepare physically? But the truth is you don't have to prepare so much. If you start cycling and you do 30 kilometers in a day, it's fine. And then you slowly go up and up and up, and you get fit throughout the journey. You don't have to be at your peak fitness when you start the journey.
So this is how we explain our lack of preparation, because the reality is we really wanted to prepare a bit more. We were hoping that our fitness will somehow contribute to like making the journey easier. But then it turned out that not really. Like the mountain, the ski touring fitness is not easily transferable. And then we thought, okay, like at least we will do a few day long trip before we actually set off. And it was just so chaotic before and those few weeks before we decided to start that we didn't do any cycling, literally to the extent that I never had a bicycle with a drop bar before. And I really wanted to try one. So our bikes now have a drop bar, and I never rode a drop bar bike before. And the first time I sat on one was the day that we started the journey. And I remember we rode out the street and we were waving to Jonas's parents. And then he turned the street and I just like crashed into Jonas's back tire. Really, didn't really know like how to brake in an instant. So we were totally not prepared, but to assure everybody who might stress about it or might be in a similar situation, you don't really need to prepare. You learn on the way. It's completely fine.
You probably don't even think twice now.
Just like it came to my mind that even now after 20,000 kilometers, it still sometimes happens that standing on a bike, we stand and then we lose our balance and then almost fall. It's like we look like amateurs sometimes, although we've been doing this for 2 years constantly. Yeah, you just never stop learning, and that's okay.
Your bike also feels really weird when you take the panniers off. If you've set up camp and the panniers are off, and then you've got to get on your bike to just go a short distance to get some food or something, it feels really weird when it's not loaded up.
Yeah, like several times it happened, and I was like when I was cycling without the panniers, I was like, "Is something wrong? It feels so wobbly." And then I realized, oh no, it's just much more reactive than if there's 20 kilos of luggage on it. It's just,
You have momentum when you roll down a hill for a lot longer, don't you?
yeah,
That was something that struck me the first time I toured with like a really big heavy load, was just how quickly the bike sort of lost all its speed
Yeah.
as soon as the road went uphill. The other thing quickly is also, you always, when you are with a big load, you always have to be with the mindset that you've got panniers, front or back. Fitting through smaller spaces can be tricky as well. You got to take them in the center and not cut off corners.
Yeah, and especially we learned from your podcast the being commuted term, but especially when commute led us through like rivers with absolutely no way to cross, and there would just be like a narrow plank that we could take. Then with a fully loaded bicycle, it's really challenging to navigate on a narrow plank through a river. Yeah, it's heavier. It's heavier.
All I can think of though, Hannah, when you're explaining that is, thank goodness there's two of you to help navigate that situation. Couldn't imagine doing it solo.
Hmm.
yeah, we have huge respect for people, especially women that travel solo, because it's definitely a whole nother challenge if you're all by yourself and you don't have anything to help you out. Always when one of us is down or is in some kind of issue, there's always somebody else who can help, and that makes huge difference.
How was it for your relationship traveling in this manner together as well? Like, you're together all the time, even if you're some distance away on the road. Like, I imagine there are days where one of you is feeling happy and one of you maybe is not feeling the greatest you've ever been. You were saying, Jonas, it can be helpful, but have there been times where it's actually been hard, where you may have wanted just some extra time away?
Yeah, totally. It hasn't been extremely hard. We found out that we cooperate very well together, and kind of we have in the beginning. I think what was different is to decide who does what, to kind of find our roles. We wanted to share all the tasks, and then over time we realized that one of us likes doing something more, one of us likes to do something else, and that's completely fine. We don't have to share everything. And in this way, a person can also have their time alone. But we also had some times when it is a bit difficult that we are 24/7 together for 2 years. And I think it was one night on this whole journey where I had an injury. And so Jonas went with some national park rangers up into the mountains. And it was the only night that we spent together. And
Apart, spend apart.
that we spent apart. And we are kind of looking forward to having a bit of time apart as well.
I think that's normal, and it's a healthy thing to feel. I think it's actually testament to obviously how strong your relationship is. You go away for 2 years, you are still together as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Sometimes it's hard, but in general, I'm very surprised how well it's working. I thought it's going to be a lot tougher to be together all the time and to make every single decision together. You have to decide, do we stop now? Do we continue? Even if it's just for a water break, like everything you have to do together, because only one has the navigation. So we cannot even like cycle apart for a few hours, because then we might lose each other.
That's not lost on me either. We were saying how difficult it would be traveling solo, but I guess that is the payoff. You are the person making the decision. It was previous guests, the Bro James family of 5 traveling, and that was something that Alex, the father, was said. They have to make decisions together. There's 5 of them that need to come to a decision and come to an agreement on something. It's been great for the 3 teenagers to come to that experience and to learn that about working with the group, but it also doesn't make for fast travel. Or seamless travel, I guess, would be a better way of putting it. You don't take off on a 2-year tour, or almost 2-year tour, with the view that you're going fast by any measure.
Yeah, and you have to always have an opinion, because you make decisions together. You cannot just say, I don't know what I want, and then the other person will also say, I also don't know, and then you're just staring at each other and nothing is done. You have to have an opinion, and yeah, you basically have to constantly take into consideration what the other person needs and how they feel. So maybe there are days where one of us feels very strong, but then the other person doesn't. And that means that, we will not do so much. And actually the momentum that one of the person has is not going to be fully explored that day because it's just the way it is. Yeah.
Let's go back. Did you start your trip in Germany?
Yes.
Yes, and you're in Malaysia now. There's a long way between Germany and Malaysia. How much of your trip or your route did you really have planned? Was it sort of a rough plan in terms of, well, this country, then this country, then this country? Or was it more you were talking about working with the NGO prior? You had it in your mind to visit as many of the initiatives and projects that you already knew about. Were they more the milestones and they dictated the route for you?
In Europe, that was the case. So in Europe, we had specific organizations or projects that we wanted to visit, or specific places where we knew that there's some kind of conservation project going on. So in Europe, we had a pretty clear route, but that basically immediately stopped when we arrived in Turkey because we didn't know anybody in Turkey. We didn't know much about the country or the nature conservation scene. So then it was just like, okay, let's go east. And also in the beginning, we made kind of a rough route to get to Singapore, just according to some interesting places that we wanted to see. We really wanted to travel to Iran and Georgia. And then we thought China is going to be the easiest route because we just have one big country and you can travel long distance there. Then it turned out because of COVID, it was not possible at all. And we had a rough plan, but in the end, we made a completely different route than we had in mind in the beginning.
Yeah, I could imagine. And I was just thinking when you were speaking there, and when I was learning about your trip and considering the time that you did depart, land borders being closed in certain areas and conflicts taking place dictated where you couldn't go as well, no doubt.
Yeah, exactly. We had to make some decisions on the spot. Also, we were in Georgia in winter 2022, and it could have been possible to cross into Azerbaijan, but the land borders were closed. I think they are still closed. So you can fly in, but of course we didn't. That's ridiculous to fly in from Tbilisi to Georgia or to Azerbaijan. And so we did actually contact the Ministry of Environment of Azerbaijan, whether they can make an exception because of our project. And they would have let us in, but the whole process took many months. And by that time, we couldn't just wait around in Georgia. So we had to make a decision to fly in the end to India. Yeah, in Germany, we still thought that we can do this whole journey without flying, which was not the case, which was a bit difficult to swallow. But in the end, that's just how it is. And political situations do not always align to your ideas of traveling and freedom and easy border crossings.
The most important thing you could probably pack for a bicycle tour isn't something physical, but it's a concept, and it's that of flexibility.
Yeah, 100%.
Being flexible and open to change, not being fixed that the plan that you set off with is the one that you're going to be able to complete along the way, because things are out of your control.
Yeah, 100%. I think for us, maybe even more than for others, because as I said, like in the beginning, we had a plan which projects we wanted to visit. But then from Turkey on, we didn't at all know anymore. So we were just relied on people telling us or like finding out through different ways what is happening. And then if we found an interesting project, then we just went there, and if it was the opposite direction and we were planning to head, we changed the route. And that happened many times in the journey, that we just completely overhauled our route because we got, okay, we have to see this.
That, though, really forms sharply that what your purpose for this trip was. It wasn't to get to Singapore the most direct way. It was to really educate, learn, and educate yourselves and then others about all these projects that are going on in between. And obviously you can't do every single one, but it would be amazing if you were to tally all the ones that you did visit, just how many that would be over the span of almost 2 years.
I think it probably is over 100, maybe around 110, 120 projects that we visited.
Far out. I have this as a question for the end or close to the end of the show, but it just feels natural to ask you more about it now. Having undertaken a trip like that, and having been to so many of those sort of projects and seeing what's happening, biodiversity in local communities and initiatives on the ground, how do you feel about the state of things from that perspective?
Well, we could talk for hours about this.
Definitely. Maybe it's good that I've asked you early.
Yeah, that's a very complex question. It is a dire situation in that, like we talk about that, people talk about crisis and stuff all the time, but that is justified. It's important to stress that all that is true. We are in a climate crisis, we are in a biodiversity crisis. But what is true and what we focused on this journey is that there are solutions to that. And those solutions don't need big, necessarily like big signs and big corporations to do that or anything. They just need local people that know the ecosystem and that know the community and that work with the local community and the local ecosystem to preserve a certain ecosystem. And that has to be multiplied then and extrapolated on a bigger scale.
And maybe also that what you see, maybe what you see on the surface might not always reflect the reality, meaning that, many people, for example, who travel in India, they think that nature in India, like how people treat nature, there's so much trash, there's so much pollution. How can you live like this? And India, in reality, is one of the most biodiverse countries that we've ever visited, and we were blown away.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm blown away hearing that as well, because, and both hands up here, I've never been, but it is definitely the perception that I have of a really densely populated place, lots going on, lots of rubbish, lots of dirt. And that does exist in places, I'm guessing, but you've experienced a different perspective as well now.
Yeah, exactly. So that all is true, like when humans first stepped or like appeared in the world 6 million years ago, 99% of mammal biomass was wildlife. Now 1% is wildlife of the mammal biomass on the planet. 30-ish is humans, and most of it is actually livestock. Most of it is the cows and pigs that we keep everywhere. There's 1% that is left to wildlife. We have a gigantic impact on the planet, and every bicycle tourer, every person who has open eyes is able to see that. But there is still a lot of biodiversity left to protect, and the fight is not over yet.
I'm going to ask a question. When we speak about the word biodiversity, what I'm thinking of is I'm thinking of like everything interconnected together. So the environment, the plant life, the wildlife, the human connections to it, what that cycle looks like together, how it works together. Would that be right? Or how would you describe the word biodiversity?
Yeah, that's also a complex question because even scientifically, there's like many levels of biodiversity. So when most people think about biodiversity, they think about species diversity. So the number of species that exist in a certain area or on the whole globe. But then there's also genetic diversity. So within a species, how much genetic diversity is there? And like it exists on so many levels that we don't even think about, like fungi biodiversity. It's like a huge group that is crucial for our ecosystems, but most of the time you don't see them, so they're not on people's minds. So biodiversity is a very broad term. In general, it really just like what it is the diversity of life. That's the definition of the term, and that exists on many levels, just like diversity exists on many levels in humans and society. And visiting over 100 projects, we also realized that, when you talk about biodiversity, when you talk about nature conservation, there's so many aspects to it that it's almost impossible to all put them together in one conversation like now, or in one concept, in one solution. And that is, where this confusion comes from, kind of sometimes.
I can fully appreciate that. Obviously, knowing I was going to interview both of you, I've looked into a lot of what you've been doing, and something that struck me is the projects that you've seen are so, without wanting to, they are diverse. They're so different in different places, and the type of things that you're looking at are so different from not even one country to another, just in one area to another as well. So it is a complex area. Can I ask, just because we were talking about India there, you were talking, Hannah, how there's a lot of biodiversity. There's a lot of good things that are happening there too. It's not all over, badly polluted and horrible and not great. Is there something you've seen so many, but is there something that's come to mind that you could describe about that? Something that gave you, I don't know if hope's the right word, but something good that you saw to make that point?
Yeah, I think how I would be able to describe it is that maybe our Western perception of nature is something very clean and very polished, organized, nicely trimmed grass, and there is no dead wood in the forest, and everything is just a beautiful shape and perfect. And when you see something that is wild and uncontrolled and maybe has even trash, then you classify it as something that is in a bad state. But actually, in India, because of the culture, because of the religion, people have a much closer relationship with nature, with wildlife. They have a much higher tolerance towards wildlife inhabiting the human spaces. Or they even realize that human spaces are not just human spaces, they're also spaces for wildlife, and it's about sharing. So this is where these stories come up, that tigers roam into villages, that elephants munch on crops in farms and people's crop fields, that crocodiles live in rivers inside towns and cities, which we even saw with our own eyes. And that kind of made us realize that it is not maybe the pollution necessarily, or not kind of the visible signs that humans leave around themselves that will deter wildlife. It is really just about tolerating wildlife around yourselves. I don't know if it's understandable.
Oh, very. I comprehend what you're saying. We keep a very sanitized look of what works well.
Yeah.
We fence crops, we keep things clean, but perhaps there's a reason why there's undergrowth, perhaps there's a reason, and allowing nature to do what it was intended to do in an area isn't the worst thing either.
Yeah, totally. And many people go to India, to Africa to see the magnificent wildlife, and they think, okay, like I'm going to travel there, and that's the spot where I can see tigers, and in Africa I can see giraffes. But no, not in my home. I don't want wildlife there. I don't want any kind of predators. I don't want any conflict with wildlife. Let me have them in other countries where I can just visit them as a tourist. But I don't want to deal with what that means for me as a person to live and to share a space with animals.
There's obviously a big distance between Germany and India, right? And knowing that you were visiting a lot of projects along the way. But was it when you were in India that you came across that realization of how we view biodiversity in the West is so different? Or was this something that was building as you were viewing projects, going through Turkey, going through Iran, going through the Balkans or anything like that as well?
Yeah, India was definitely the most impactful country for us in that it really changed our perspective completely, because we studied ecology, we've worked in Europe in nature conservation. And even though there are also many things happening, there are some common, what is considered like common knowledge or like a common ground. But then in India, we realized that that is something that was made up at some time, that it's not set, it's not the only truth. And in India, we really realized that you can have a completely different relationship to nature, and that has its upsides and the downsides. Definitely, like you cannot say in India things are better all in all, but you can also not say that everything is worse in India. And it really just opened our eyes in how many different ways we interact with nature, and how many different ways there are that humans impact biodiversity, and how many different ways there are to find solutions to improve that relationship.
And actually, something that I came across when I was looking through some of the projects that you had visited as well, it harks back to what you were saying earlier, Hanna and Jonas, about it doesn't all have to be the biggest massive thing to make a difference. Small things, micro changes in a lot of places will help make a difference too. It was a initiative you were visiting in Islamabad.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the name written down. It was Maria Hashim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nature Experiences Behind Four Walls. And the way you wrote about it, it was quite beautiful. I'm going to butcher this word, and someone's going to tell me how you say it properly. Sundrosas, Sundrosas, or it was a word which you grew up with, which was about
Yes.
having experiences in nature, like being brought up as a child to be outdoors in nature. Okay, Hannah, it's your word. So how do I pronounce this word?
I mean, it's so funny that you use that, because now everybody from my home region will be ecstatic that this word gains some attention. It's called chunderozás.
Chunderoshes. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm an Australian trying to pronounce it. But anyway, what I loved about it, though, Hannah, and everyone listening to this is confused because they don't know this word, and you're going to describe it better than me. From my understanding it was all about being exposed to nature. Being in nature is good for you. It's good for nature. It's good to experience lighting a fire, being immersed in the outdoors and seeing that. And you had that experience as a child. And what struck me was when you were then in Islamabad, and this lady, Maria, she had set up projects which were encouraging children to have experiences in the outdoors, in nature. And it sort of reminded me of what you were saying. You had these experiences growing up, and now here's an initiative which is encouraging children from a young age to have these outdoor experiences, because what that will do is have them appreciate nature, appreciate the outdoors, and then that will help them be more aware of it, but also care about it. Hope I've got that right. That's sort of the perspective that I had on it.
Yeah, that's spot on. Yeah, the memories and what this word means to me is really a group of people being outside, eating something that is prepared on the campfire, and maybe it involves some music, maybe it involves just chatting and looking at the fire, setting up a tent, and enjoying being outside. These are really experiences that shape me and shape every child. Really, like, if there's so many activities that you can do outside, that every children loves. And when we were there in Islamabad, Maria's it is a nature camp that she organizes for children, and she has activities like learning how to fish. She makes her own fishing rods from bamboo, and they can learn how to fish, and then they collect various insects and just look at the diversity of insects, and they make kind of bird feeders and all kinds of fun stuff, which makes you kind of connect with nature. So it bridges this gap that we don't know what to do out there. It's boring. I don't know. It's not so, not so many interesting things going on, or like so many fast information as we get right nowadays from the internet. But there is actually a bunch of things that you can do which will be very, very fun and interesting to learn about nature there. So it's just really cool to visit her.
Instilling that from a younger age helps to instill that into someone. Because what that struck me was that a biodiversity project doesn't need to be this thing undertaken by adults in a perfect field sort of space to reverse something that's happened to the ecosystem. It can actually be something about nurturing the love of being in the outdoors and in nature as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's the foundation for everything. And so many people we've met, they started getting into nature conservation because when they grew up, they loved being outdoors, and then also when we talk about there's so many like ways to conserve nature and so many issues, but with children you realize that every human has a natural sense for nature and a natural love for nature, and what is just important is to activate that love and to guide them a little bit how they can preserve this beautiful nature that every human naturally is fascinated by.
And what is really cool, in Germany, we spend time with an art teacher, actually, who creates nature art and also teaches arts in school to children. And I remember she was saying that in one class or a series, they were building from natural material. She asked them to build structures like houses, buildings, without using any kind of glue or nails or things that might hurt the natural material, let's say wood, to be creative. And what's beautiful in teaching children this and letting them explore these kind of possibilities is that what they learn, it also trickles down, or like it gets into, like, basically they go home and they will tell their parents, and then they maybe will ask questions like, okay, like, why are we going by car to the school? Since I've heard in the school that actually I can also go by bicycle, and why, and they can also inspire their parents and their families to make some kind of small but actually really important choices as well. So this kind of youth education and nature consciousness is super, super important, not just for the future generation, but also for everybody, all the generations.
I love that. I love that a lot. I want to take you back a little bit in your trip. The elements, we're talking about nature. The environment plays a big role in this. That when you're physically in an environment all the time, it has its toll on you as well. And something that struck me was, we were talking earlier about when you were thinking about borders with Azerbaijan and when we were contemplating that, but you obviously were in Georgia in wintertime. It looked pretty bleak. What was it like being somewhere there as a bike tourer, camping as well, and out there physically? What's it like exposing yourself in that way and dealing with the discomfort?
Of course, it's not always easy, but we love the outdoors. We already, before, we used to go on hikes in winter in the Austrian Alps, so we enjoyed that kind of weather. It was definitely, after 3-4 days, you feel that maybe a night in the heated room might be good to properly warm up. But otherwise, it was pretty doable. There are some practical issues that one morning we woke up, all our water was frozen, all our food was frozen. So we had nothing to drink, nothing to eat. Our shoes were frozen.
Even the toothpaste was frozen. But then the beauty is in this is that we just set off, okay, we cannot eat anything, we cannot brush our teeth. And then the first shop that we arrived to, they immediately invited us for some good Armenian spirit, 10 in the morning, some hard alcohol, warms you from the inside.
Oh gosh, that will. I always think they're like jet fuel. You could put it in a plane and it'd be able to take off.
It's pretty good when it's cold outside.
Or you could understand why it's consumed in wintertime, possibly a lot more too. Wow.
It was, I remember that we felt that it is a struggle, that of course everything takes more of our energy. Getting ready in the morning is a struggle. Setting our tent up in the evening is a struggle. And in between is just a very few hours of sunlight. So it's basically 12 hours a day from 6 o'clock, even more, from 6 o'clock in the evening to 8 the next morning. We were just laying in one horizontal position in our sleeping bags, not doing anything else. It was challenging in a way, but after almost a year of being in tropical heat, we think back to these weeks like such a delight. It was so nice to have the cold and to be able to warm up and not have to sweat all the time. So
it's a hard question, isn't it? Because which one would you prefer to expose yourself to? The harshness of a cold winter or the discomfort of a very hot and humid environment?
For me, I definitely prefer the cold. And I think the hottest we were was when we were in June in India, just before the monsoon started. Regularly had over 40 degrees during the day and over 30 at night, every night basically.
Exasperating.
Yeah, we woke up at 4 a.m. to cycle a few hours, and then we were hoping that we could just sleep during the day. But when it's 40 degrees out, and in rural India, there are not many places which are air conditioned, so you cannot escape the heat. If you're lucky, you find a fan somewhere that you can sit under for a few hours, but to properly rest is almost impossible. And then at night, it's so hot that you cannot sleep in the tent. So if then you're also in areas where dengue and stuff is present and you have to protect yourself from mosquitoes, it's pretty rough. So I definitely prefer the cold because most of the time you will find a house to warm up in or something, but sometimes the heat you really couldn't escape at all.
What about you, Hannah? Are you the same?
No. I think I'm kind of like a generalist. I can cope in heat as well. It's not so challenging for me as for Jonas. I don't handle cold so well as him, but when we started, we bought these zippable sleeping bags, so you can zip them together. And if you're a couple, that's amazing when one of you has cold feet, because you can just warm it or basically steal the body heat of the other person.
It makes sense to be cozy when it's cold.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, so if I would be alone, I think I would have struggled much more with the winter conditions. But since Jonas is so good with it, it was basically, I remember we put up the tent and I got into the sleeping bag and he was doing everything. He was cooking for us and I just kept myself warm inside. So not really useful. I didn't really contribute much to the team, but I survived and that's the most important.
Jonas, you mentioned being in areas with dengue fever, and Hannah, you did get dengue, didn't you?
Yeah, I got dengue when we were in Bangladesh. Yes.
Oh my goodness me. A previous guest of the show, Roxy from Roxy and Tommy, she also got dengue as well. And from what I understood from her experience, it's not something anybody ever wants to get. It's very painful as well. How did that play out for you? What happened there?
Yeah, it was really, really difficult for me. Many people actually, when the first time they get dengue, it's asymptomatic. I think 60-70% of the infections are asymptomatic, but I was among those 30 that don't experience it like that. So I think the first week I didn't even test positive, and after finally it turned out that I had dengue fever, it took 2 full weeks where I couldn't even move, I couldn't eat anything, and I was seriously contemplating whether I can continue cycling, because of course I was aware that if I'm not nourishing my body, then also my fitness is going to exponentially decrease, and I couldn't imagine being back on the bicycle. It was hard in those 2 weeks, and then it was also very hard afterwards when I got enough time to recover and I slowly gained my appetite back. And I remember the first days back on the bicycle, we were cycling in northern Thailand, where from Chiang Mai we were cycling towards the Laotian border. And in some hills I was really struggling, and I knew that back before the dengue, this wouldn't have been such a problem. And mentally, that was really hard for me to be patient with myself and kind of be positive that the endurance that I gained in the last 1.5 years hasn't just vanished. It just needs some time to come back.
I can appreciate how much of a downer that would be in the moment, though, as well, because from what I understand, dengue is also quite painful when you have it too. It's not just fatigue. There's pain involved with that as well. Were you in hospital for a time?
Yeah, for a few days I was in hospital, but actually you cannot really do anything about it. You just have to wait it out. You take some painkillers or to bring the fever down, but there is really not much that you can do. And yeah, the brain is, I remember that I had some states where really, like, if somebody would have put in front of me like 4 cards, like a piano, cat, piano, I wouldn't have been able to say which one is the cat. So my brain was totally off and I couldn't even think. I couldn't read. I couldn't watch anything. It was just kind of like a vegetative state.
Is there anything you can actually do with that type of virus? Like, it's a mosquito-borne virus. I asked that maybe semi-selfishly. I'm one of those people that attracts mosquitoes. If, when you're out of a barbecue or a picnic and it's in the evening and mosquitoes are around, there's always one poor soul that has like 20 bites and everyone else is like, oh, we're okay. I'm the 20 bite person. And so it's always something I've been concerned about, is if I was to travel to these areas, dengue, or in areas where there's malaria or something, because mosquitoes seem to like me, does that mean that it's a given that that's going to happen to me? Like, is there anything, like, people who live in these areas, what do they do? Do they just continually get it, or do you develop immunity to it? Like, did you find this out?
Yeah, they continually get it. So actually, I think when it comes to dengue, 90% of people under the age of 14 in these dengue areas already got it. And you get temporary immunity. So I was also, after I recovered, I looked at some studies, and there are 4 variants to dengue. So they say that for about 6 months you get general immunity, and even after that you have immunity to this one variant that you got. But there is even a vaccine now that you can actually get. And I'm also a mosquito magnet, just like you, Bella. And, like, you can be kind of thankful that you're basically protecting the other people around you. It's very altruistic, actually, that you kind of,
Oh,
other
it's so
people should
generous of
thank
us.
you.
I've been saying that I am everybody else's mosquito repellent.
Yeah,
I do say that.
exactly.
I'm guessing that it did take a number of weeks to recover, but obviously you did, because, you made it a long way since Bangladesh.
Yeah. I recovered, and for a while I was very paranoid of mosquito bites, but by now it also faded, and I haven't gotten any other new illness, disease since then, and mosquitoes still bite me. So that kind of shows how small the chance is in reality that you get such a disease.
From not nice experiences, an experience which I saw, and I just, as a mountain lover, was just like, wow, this would be something right up my alley, was you went really into the Himalayas, your experiences in the Skardu Valley, or the Annapurna region. And I want to hear about this place, and not just the ecology, but also traveling through environments like this. What was that like?
Yeah, fascinating. I think that's the best word you can use. So I think it was already clear that both of us are mountain lovers anyway. We love spending our time in the mountains, and we even love cycling in the mountains. Many people are like, how can I do this route with the least climbing? And we're like, how can we do it with the most climbing? How can we go up even further into the mountains?
Oh, Jonas, you're speaking straight to my soul. I am aligned. I'm with you there.
Yeah, so in the Annapurna region, we actually left our bicycles behind, though, because there are people that do the Annapurna circuit on bicycle, but after doing it on foot, we don't really get how, because it's like a very small little footpath that you have to do.
I mean, they carried their bicycles next to them, and we just didn't find that that's necessary.
It's a long hiker bike.
Yeah, hiker biking for 7 days is kind of not our thing. I mean, I think what we just love in the Himalayas, we just, you realize how tiny you are among these gigantic old mountains. Like all these mountains, they were once covered by sea, they were once underwater, and now you're like, for me personally, what I always find amazing is to think about that the underwater surface just looks just like this. There are gigantic mountains underwater. And when I see the Himalayas, I'm just thinking like, wow, like there's so much that we haven't discovered yet, and so much where we cannot even go. And it's just a blessing, really, an amazing gift to be here and to traverse through these gigantic mountain ranges.
Yeah, sure. From an ecology point of view, they're also super interesting regions because nature is so powerful there. It really shows us our limits. Unfortunately, both the Annapurna region and the Karakoram region are some of the regions that are most vulnerable to climate change in the world, because they're so high up in the mountains. They're very fragile ecosystems. They very much depend on the glaciers that feed rivers, and if there's a heavy rainfall, it's not only the rain, it's whole mountains that get flushed down. It can cause huge devastation in these regions. So it's also very interesting from that point of view to see how humans for thousands of years over long process adapted to these kind of environments that are very special and very tough to live in. And then to see how quickly climate change could put an end to all of that. It's very sad in a way, but also so inspiring to talk to these people and also see how much they love their home, even though it can be so hostile in a way.
Yeah, and it's a landscape which is forever changing there too, physically.
Yeah.
Physically, the landscape is changing from mudslides, avalanches, glacial melt, all that type of stuff is changing and having an impact on that area specifically.
Yeah, when we traveled to Nepal has by far the worst roads we've seen on this journey. But when you see the dynamics in Nepal, then it's clear, like every summer roads get flushed away because there's huge rainfalls, and it's just getting worse because of climate change. So yeah, it's like it's constantly changing, and it's in a way the beauty of it, but it's what makes it so vulnerable as well, because it's a fine-tuned dynamic, all this change.
Yeah, I've seen footage of the Nepalese roads, documentaries watching mountaineers and things, and also in Pakistan, probably documentaries watching mountaineers going to K2 or something like that. And there's always that footage of the roads and people being in like the overpacked buses and trucks traversing like a fraught cliff edge. I don't think I have the stomach for that. Were you cycling on those type of roads ever, or were you actually, when you were hiking, did you have to take some of that type of transport to get to areas?
We were also cycling. In Pakistan, we took the Karakoram highway, which is really good.
But
Most
also
of the
there,
time.
also
Yeah.
there,
No,
there
true.
was
Yeah.
there was a landslide, and then you had to drive through half a meter deep water because there's just a new river was created that was running over the street basically.
Exactly as you described, these buses, very crammed, and if you look through the window, you see these many hundreds of meters deep fall that you could just roll down with the bus. It is exactly like that.
What were you both like there? Are you both the sort that just embraced that, or was there a little bit of anxiety?
For me, when actually the like furthest part we went into the Karakoram was one of the toughest 3 days of cycling for me, because when we were in Gilgit, which is kind of the last big town, I got sick. I got a stomach flu, and I didn't recover properly. So I still had a stomach flu when we started cycling again into the last town that we wanted to visit. That was really tough.
Can't even imagine.
Yeah. But luckily, like the Karakoram highway is actually a pretty good road now. So like road condition wise, it was pretty good. In Nepal, it was different. We took one bus ride between Kathmandu and Pokhara, the two biggest cities of Nepal. It's only 250 kilometers, and it took us over 10 hours by bus to get there.
It's interesting. Whenever I've seen it, there's always fresh mudslides and landslides that have washed the road up. There's always like a traffic jam. And there's always like road crew workers, like they're very efficient in clearing it as well, which is amazing. Was that your experience on that road in that section?
There was a lot of construction going on, not so much landslides, because we were there in March, so towards the end of the dry season rather. But for example, when we were in Laos, there we also followed a road that was not very busy, or a bit smaller. And there we did have some stretches where there were like landslides everywhere, and they just cleared enough path for like one car to fit through and everything.
You would just see these gigantic folds, these rocks that splashed and destroyed half of the concrete road. And there's just like a gaping hole, and you're cycling there, you know.
And smaller stones just like becoming loose and falling down. And you're like, okay, let's get away from here.
Let's put my helmet on, hope that protects.
I can only imagine how unsettling that could feel at the time. But I mean, we talk then about going from the very high mountains, being in the Karakoram region there, to then all of a sudden the lush, green, humid, tropical environment there in Southeast Asia. What's it like making such a stark difference? I guess, do you ever both reflect back and just think about the changing environments that you've experienced from that perspective too?
Yeah, for us, landscapes and regions and climate changes in so many ways, and it's crazy how much it has changed on this journey. Somehow we were very unlucky since we arrived in Asia with our timing, because we hit 3 different rainy seasons. So in India we cycled through monsoon, then in Vietnam we hit rainy season again, and now in Malaysia on the east coast it's also rainy season. So several times we were like, okay, now rainy season is over. Oh no, actually, where we're gonna cycle now, rainy season is just about to start.
With floods and everything that comes with it.
Wow. What's your hot tip then? Because you've not given up your trip. You're nearly at the end of, your destination point. How did you keep on course there mentally to keep persisting through this type of weather?
I think we just embraced it. We were quite frustrated. Like we are waterproof. Like we carry these raincoats with us, but we never wore them basically because when you're cycling, it's very damp if you wear them. So we just prefer to get wet. It's hot anyway. It's not like rains back in Central Europe, which also bring a cold wave with them. So you just get wet once and then you cycle along and just are used to being at least not sweaty, but rain wet. But what constantly frustrated us was the realization how our gear is also degrading with the humidity. So we started the first little mold pattern started appearing on our tent. And then our sleeping mats are moldy. Our tent is completely moldy. Several of our clothes are moldy. And we just, in all kinds of new corners of our like camera bag and all kinds of places, we find mold.
I've never thought of that. Like, I know what the hassle is of, having to pack up a wet tent and not being able to dry it out from a discomfort point of view. But I've never actually thought longer term about the mold issues there.
No.
Oh my gosh. And your clothes as well. There's no escape from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also a topic that we didn't think is going to be as big of an issue as it is. Like now, really, for example, on our sleeping mat, we have some pretty disgusting mold stains. And, if you pack up a tent once and then, yeah, it's annoying, but then you put it up and then it dries. But if for months it's raining all the time, then it never gets dry. So then these kind of issues start. I remember like the first thing we noticed that we still had these down sleeping bags that we used for like winter and stuff. We really loved them. But then after a few weeks, after the monsoon started in India, they started smelling horrible because they got wet once. And then especially out of town, you don't get the moisture out at all anymore. Humidity never drops below 90%. So then we realized, okay, we have to be more careful with everything regarding like moisture and stuff.
Yeah, we sent those sleeping bags back and they have been properly washed back at our parents' place and they were still salvageable, but we would advise to anyone who has kind of the interest to cycle in these tropical climates to leave down back home. Don't bring anything like this. And also when it comes to clothes, you just bring stuff that you can eventually maybe throw away or are not so close to your heart because everything will suffer from the humidity.
Yeah, but it's a good lesson to really cut down your luggage because everything, you're happy for everything that can't get wet and you don't have to worry about keeping dry. So a bunch of things we just threw out or left behind because we thought, okay, we don't have to keep it. The least we have to keep dry, the better.
Electronics would be really tricky to balance in that situation. And like, I'm guessing, if you've got laptops or cameras and stuff, I'm guessing that they're the critical items that you definitely don't want any sort of moisture getting into there.
Yeah. That's luckily like with these things, it's not so bad because you don't really ever have to expose them to the moisture and then you just put them in a plastic bag and then it's fine, It's not like with the tent and the sleeping mats, like if it rains on the tent, the water is underneath the tent, everything gets wet, but the electricity can get dry. Hannah's sword broke once because it ended up in the sea. But otherwise, we didn't have any problems with the electronics.
That's sad ending for the phone. I mean, were you in a rice producing area? Because putting electronics in a big thing of rice can help sometimes.
Yeah, it was actually a surprisingly fast high tide. And we arrived to the coast of the Indian Ocean. We were so happy. We wanted to go for a swim and we didn't realize that it's high tide. So like the phone that I left, it nicely got washed into the sea and no amount of rice could help it. But then it is still working. Sometimes it's not charging. Sometimes it's not in the mood to cooperate, but I still have it.
Something that's clear to me actually from both of you is And I guess it would have to form part of your personality is a sustainability side with both of you as well, of looking at not wasting things, not being part of a throwaway society as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's also a huge part of why we did this journey by bicycle, is because we wanted it to be as sustainable as possible. And like we talked about how many different facets there are to nature conservation and biodiversity and the human nature relationship. And one of the biggest of them is how we consume. Like that is the most important thing when it comes to what impact we have on nature, is how much we consume and also how we consume, but mainly how much we consume. So for these 2 years, basically all we thought about was this topic. All we talked about was this, and we already tried to be sustainable before, but now even more. And now, living on a bicycle for so long and like having to carry everything, you really realize that you don't need many things.
And that you can repair a lot of things, or you don't need the newest out there. And especially, I think, also these outdoor brands, a lot of bigger corporations, bigger brands, they want to get this image out there that you have to look trendy, like all these colors, that you should be like Instagrammable when you are exercising outdoors. And it's totally not the reality. You're already sweaty, and the last thing on your mind is how you look, at least for us. So like not everything has to be color coded, and like not every bag has to fit each other on a color palette. And that's what we represent as well. Like we don't want to buy new things if we can repair things, and that's how we also look. So also our bicycles and our bags have gone through, I don't know, many, many repairs. It's also beautiful because in India they have this term jugaad, which I think many bicycle travelers know who were in India. It just means kind of a fast repair, like a clever idea how to repair something. And in many of these countries, this still exists. That in India, umbrellas are repaired, stockings are repaired, things that we maybe just want to throw out. Maybe it's even cheaper to get a new one. But actually, when you think about your impact, the most you can do, as Jonas said, is to consume less and repair more, and just value your things for longer, So like everything we use was made by some people who, if we paid little money for it, that also means that those people who produced it were also paid very little. The least we can do is use that product in its fullest, for its whole lifetime, and kind of respect these kind of items that we use and wear.
Previous guests, Arev and Matthias, and if you're both listening to this, hello, while you're on your amazing world bike tour as well. I think there was a photo of Matthias's shirt from a few years on the road, full of holes and stuff, but still wearing it. And I think every long distance bicycle traveler has probably had this experience. Things are going to rip. I often wonder whether one of the most valuable things to take on a trip are things that help us repair items too, then, no doubt. I imagine like a needle and thread would have gotten a fair bit of use for both of you on this trip at some stage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a big chunk of the luggage that we carry is to help us repair stuff.
And zip ties are an amazing invention.
I want to come back to a bit more of the biodiversity projects here. And actually, we're talking about Southeast Asia, so let's focus on some of that. Wildlife tourism plays a big part in a lot of these areas as well. And on the one hand, I can understand how the local communities require those tourism dollars to help sustain them. So there's a part that it plays in that community and the funding for that community. And obviously, on the other hand, there's the wildlife side and how the animals may be treated for that, and tourism that involves wildlife. There's examples of where it's done very well, and there's examples where it's possibly not done well at all. I imagine that you would have been exposed to this as well. What have you learnt from traveling through these sort of areas in terms of that?
Yeah, I think one of the most present topics when it comes to, well, not really wildlife, but animal tourism is the elephant tourism in Thailand. It's a huge draw for people. It's one of the most important reasons that people come to Thailand for. And there are like hundreds of elephant farms. And the problem is really that as a simple traveler, it's very hard to tell which one of them are ethical or not. And we talked to specialists in elephant tourism and keeping elephants. And it's a very complicated topic in general, whether you should support this or not. Because there are at the moment 4,000 elephants living in captivity in Thailand, and elephants get 80 years old. So there's going to be thousands of them for more decades to come. And, there's no clear answer. Is it right? Should this continue, or should we just phase out elephant tourism at all because it's not good for the animals? And we visited one sanctuary where we really experienced probably the best way to do it, which is called Following Giants, which is certified by the World Animal Protection. It's an international NGO. And there you just follow the elephants, and you can just see them during their natural behavior, feeding, bathing, but not bathing. In other sanctuaries, and you can do it when they offer elephant bathing. That means they're kind of forced to bathe sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day, which is not natural at all. And there they just do it if they want to. And if not, then they go feeding or they just stand around. That's the reality. And we also visited other sanctuaries. We visited the bear sanctuary, just general wildlife rescue sanctuary. And it can be hard for people to know how ethical they are or not. But there are definitely sources to find out which ones do good work and which ones are actually ethical and helping the wildlife. So it's definitely important, if you want to go to Southeast Asia to see certain species, to just do your research beforehand.
We do have the ability. We live in a day and age where doing research beforehand is possible. I can see how much of a conundrum it is. What was it like for both of you to be in those areas? I'm conundrumed about it, and I don't have the background that both of you have. What was it like for you both?
It was complex to form an opinion, for example, about elephant tourism, because by the time when we got to Southeast Asia, we were talking a lot about community involvement in nature conservation and how communities rely on nature, they rely on resources. And these examples, we cannot blame those people for, wanting to have a livelihood for their family. They basically just think about their own future, and they also, in many cases, they are just not exposed to this knowledge that what they are doing is harmful for the animals. Or if they capture an individual from the wild, they might not know that actually the population of that species is declining, and if they take one individual from nature, it's going to have a bigger impact. So basically, local people are not, their intentions are not bad. They are not doing this to harm animals. We understand, I think, what we learned from this journey is also to understand that these topics are much bigger than nature conservation. Like, these things are so intertwined. There is like social aspects and political aspects, and nature, it's all basically how humans are connected to nature is all very much intertwined. By the time we got to Southeast Asia, we also kind of realized that our perceptions on this journey have changed. We didn't come here to blame people for these kind of things, but we were open to understanding where they come from. And instead of saying, okay, like, this is horrible, what's happening, let's shut all these elephant sanctuaries down and let's release these elephants back into the wild, we understand that there could be maybe a middle ground which helps people, but is also putting the animal welfare perspective in the forefront. And of course, a lot of these activities are resulting from the demand the tourists create. So if there wouldn't be such a response, such a positive response, then there wouldn't be these industries flourishing in the first place. In Thailand also, Using primates for tourism reasons is very popular in Phuket and other tourist hotspots. So you would see like a little macaque on a leash or a baby gibbon, and they would be cute and they wear diapers and they cuddle you and it looks like a baby. And you think that how wonderful it is that there are these monkeys who just look like us and they hug us, and it's just like a beautiful interaction with animals, but it's actually not the reality. So we just have to be educated about these things. And
I can also understand, like, even circling back to the elephants or here with the primate issue, any of this, it is a complex issue. There are no easy answers. It isn't just an easy problem to solve either.
Yeah, and also for us, it sounds like we've been on the road for 2 years. It's so long, but to us it feels so short because we experience so many things. And with many of those things, we're still grappling what to make of it, and we're grappling what is our takeaways from this journey. So we also don't have, at the moment, many answers we don't have, we have to, when we're back home, we have to reflect on it. And sometimes when we meet people and they, oh, you've met so many conservationists, so what's your advice? And we cannot give a general advice. Our main advice is always just to listen to local experts. If you want to know what is the right thing, just listen to somebody who has been active for many decades, this certain field or something.
Maybe if you are considering visiting an elephant sanctuary, then instead of watching a YouTube blog of some two bloggers who were here and they have a certain perception, try to seek expert advice and reach out to maybe organizations and ask for ethical alternatives. And I think many of these organizations and people who we met, they would be very happy if there would be more people reaching out to them and more people making conscious decisions.
I think that's a really great takeaway for people listening to this.
And wildlife tourism, I also want to add that, one of the beauties of traveling by bicycle is that you really experience your surroundings, and you also experience that you don't have to go to a wildlife sanctuary, rescue station to see interesting wildlife, but that it's actually present all over the place. We just cycled now from the west coast to the east coast in Malaysia. So we crossed the big forest that luckily still exists in Malaysia. And we saw gibbons that were just hanging out literally like 10 meters next to the road. And we saw different species of langurs. We saw so many macaques. We saw huge monitor lizards. That's one of the beauties by bicycle. With the bus, you don't see that, or with a car, you don't recognize it. But with the bicycle, you have these small wildlife encounters where you don't need to go to a specific place to see them, but you can just encounter them anywhere.
And because you're on a bicycle, you are able to stop and take the time to actually appreciate that encounter as well.
Yeah, like really some of the most interesting wildlife encounters we had were just completely random. We cycled somewhere, and then I remember in India we saw a huge herd of blue bulls, which are gigantic gazelle species, in a crop field, or we saw a tree that was full of vultures, or just a group of different primates next to the road or something like that.
A question which I've started asking my guests is, especially when a trip is so big, don't just tell me about your trip, but tell me about one particular day of your trip. I realize that's a super hard question because you've had a trip of so many days. But Hannah, I'm going to ask this to you. If you could tell me just about one day of your trip, and it can be in whatever country, it can be in the rain if you want, or the snow, or it can be in the sunshine, the heat, or the humidity. One day of your trip, tell me about it.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good question because there is really no routine that we managed to develop. I don't know how it is with other bike tours. In the beginning, we were like, oh, we are going to stretch every day. We're going to finish the day with stretching and it's going to be so amazing. We're going to even do push-ups and have abs and whatever. None of it became a reality. We're still not doing stretching. Every day is very random. I think our favorite days are days in the mountains. So, for example, when we were in Lao. Then it was after my dengue fever and after I've been recovering, and we both felt we were both in kind of like an emotional down, tired. We had this tiredness from traveling, and we were just looking forward to some days that have rhythm. And then we found these amazing camping spots in rubber plantations, in these little huts. We would find the hut, and then we woke up in the morning. We usually have breakfasts, like some oats. We pack up, and then we start cycling. And then in Lao, that was mostly hiker biking, actually. So we made very little progress, maybe 50, 60 kilometers a day. We didn't know when we find food. So we were in Lao basically just eating the same noodle soup over and over again. We didn't care what we eat. I remember like all throughout the day, there would be children everywhere saying hi to us, greeting us, people smiling, being happy to see us. So these kind of small moments make the day. And then we just, spend the day enjoying the landscape, being happy for every little downhill that gives us a rest. What was also very beautiful that it was very easy to find campsites. So we were looking forward to where we will sleep next. We are not really looking for it much in advance, but around like before sunset, we kind of water and know that we have enough food to cook. Then we would be looking for a place to sleep. And then we found some amazing, amazing places. And this whole evening ritual where we had enough time to cook, to even read, maybe. We have a little small game that we rarely, but we do claim, like a dice game. So we just had, and also we had these amazing conversations. And I remember these days, just perfect days to get back into cycling after such a disease, because it brought us back to the freedom and kind of the joy that cycling really creates in you.
It's sort of like a culmination of both of the purposes of your trip. On one hand, it's to learn more about what's happening in these local communities and biodiversity and efforts on the ground. But on the other hand, it's also just the beauty of traveling through a landscape slowly, purposefully on a bicycle and observing and feeling. It's uplifting for you as well, especially when you've been through the lows of an illness like dengue, to then have those moments playing a dice game in a tent in a scene where you've got enough food and you've got enough water and you've got shelter. Maybe the tent's moldy at that stage. But it's still purposeful. Hanna and Jonas, I need to wrap this up, but I know that people listening to both of you there will be keen to learn more about your trip as well. You've written so many individual articles about a lot of these initiatives on a website too. So if people are keen to discover this, what's the best way for them to find out more about biking for biodiversity?
Yeah, just visit our website, bikingforbiodiversity.org. Or if you want to receive more up-to-date infos, then we are active on Instagram and Facebook as Biking for Biodiversity.
4 is the number 4.
Lovely. I will link to that in the show notes for you both there as well. And I definitely encourage you all listeners to go and click on those links and check this magnificent trip out. Okay, as I look to wrap this up, we've got 3 questions to finish the show off with. Hanna, you got to describe a typical day on the tour. So Jonas, you get to answer the question first of, if you were to pick a song to be the soundtrack to this trip, what song would it be?
It's actually a German song. I hope that's fine.
That is totally fine. We have a multilingual Seek Travel Ride playlist available now on Spotify and Apple Music as well.
Yeah, it's called Welt der Wunder, so in English, World of Wonders. And it's just a song about what a magical place this world is. And that's definitely one of the biggest takeaways of this journey, how diverse this world is and how many incredible places there are to explore.
Oh, fantastic. What about you, Hanna? You get to pick a song as well if you'd like to.
I think for me it would be El Condor Pasa, or If I Could, from Simon and Garfunkel.
Oh, okay.
It's also a song about freedom. Yeah, freedom in general. How it is to be free and the desire to be free.
Lovely. And both of those songs really wrap up your trip so beautifully, don't they?
Definitely.
Did you listen to music on your trip?
Not so much, to be honest.
I did.
Okay, Hannah did more. In the beginning, we didn't listen to anything at all while we were cycling. Eventually, after a few months, we started listening more to music, and then eventually also a lot of podcasts and audiobooks.
Yeah, now I'm in an audiobook phase.
Okay, final two questions. You know what these are. You have a choice one day to cycle perpetually uphill into a constant climb or perpetually into a constant headwind. Which one would you choose? You go first, Hannah.
Definitely uphill. Definitely uphill. I think that's the only right answer.
Uphill champion. What about you, Jonas?
Definitely uphill. We were pretty lucky with the wind. We didn't have many headwinds, but the few times we had strong headwinds are some of the worst days we remember from this journey. It's just the worst. It's horrible.
I have to ask a cheeky question then. Just if you could swap 3 monsoon seasons for more headwind days, which ones would you choose there?
Ooh, that's a tough question.
I would still
Yeah.
choose the monsoon season.
Because you're waterproof.
Yeah, because I'm waterproof, and it's a beautiful season of the year. You know, it's for nature. It's an amazing rejuvenation phase. So I might as well just endure it and kind of look at it in this way to appreciate that it's there. And yeah, getting a bit wet is not the end of the world.
I mean, if you had a headwind, you'd dry out. Final question for you then. You have a choice. You're only cycling 4 hours on this day. I always feel it's funny when I say only 4 hours because for a lot of people who just ride bikes generally, 4 hours would be a big ride. Anyway, 4 hours of cycling. Would you choose to do this 4 hours on your own or would you choose to do it with other people? And I always say when I ask this of a couple, you don't have to think that you have to cycle with each other as the other people. You can be totally independent of this and it's fine.
Yeah, definitely together. Yeah, we didn't cycle much alone on this journey. And I do think it's much more, as most things in life, is much more enjoyable if you do it together with somebody.
Yeah, when you find someone who you're really clicking with, then it's the best thing to share these experiences. So we still would do it together, even with each other, but also with other people. Sometimes we also cycled with other people on this journey, and it was always amazing, always great to, share the road. And it's for us too. It's also helps in noticing things. When one doesn't is just very focused on the road, then the other person can still point out some interesting things beforehand. So it's just more eyes to see.
I love your reasoning for all your answers there and equally loved chatting with both of you too. It's been such an insightful podcast for me. Hannah and Jonas, it has been an absolute pleasure. I know that you're not quite at Singapore yet, but I do just feel like a deep sense of congratulating you on setting yourself such a purposeful goal, and you're pretty much there now. 20,000 kilometers, almost 20 countries. I wish you all the best. I'm looking forward to seeing what's ahead for you when you also return back. But more importantly, thank you so much for sharing your stories and experiences for our listeners here on Seek Travel Ride.
Thank you so much, Bella, for the opportunity. It was really, really enjoyable and a pleasure to talk to you.
That was such a fun and enjoyable chat there with Hannah and Jonas. Equal part just being immersed in their cycle touring experience and hearing about how things were going for them there on the road, but also learning about these amazing initiatives that they took the time out to go and seek out. Learning that they sometimes even went backwards from their route when they started hearing about things just to see them firsthand. You could really see how the passion of two ecologists on a big cycle tour like this was a great combination for such a big adventure. 20,000 kilometers in 20 countries, and I wish them well for their future endeavors as well. If you're enjoying listening to Seek Travel Ride, make sure to follow us in your podcast player. Because you will then be notified when new episodes are released. We release new episodes each week. Until the next episode, my name's Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.